Hello. This video is the first of 3 videos covering the core functionality with IMan's Web API module. The Web API module gives you the capability to configure and then host almost any REST API, which can then be called by any external application. For example, post invoices, update tracking information, request pricing, customer details, or get sales history. This demonstration shows how to create a Web API endpoint, which will accept sales orders in JSON form to create orders in Sage 300. While this demonstration is geared towards Sage 300, the same principle can be applied to Sage 200, Sage 300, Intact, Acumatica, Salesforce, or indeed any application. This demonstration will be split into 2 sections: defining the API or REST endpoint, i.e. the path, the request method, security, etc. And the second section will perform the actual endpoint configuration or mapping. That is to accept and parse the request, create the order in Sage 300, and send a meaningful response to the client. A subsequent video will extend the Web API to add support for security and request contextualization. Okay, let's get to the setup of the endpoint. The first thing to do is to decide what is the endpoint or URL which the requests will be listening on. We will be configuring the Web API module for our local instance of IMan. So the first part of the URL will be http localhost/IMan Web API. As an aside, if this were being invoked from an external server or service, this would obviously reflect the server or its public DNS name. The last part of the URL is configurable, which we will define for the demonstration. We will use Sage orders. Finally, we need to decide which HTTP method the endpoint will be listening on. Naturally, the method should be POST, as we are accepting or inserting orders. For this demonstration, we will use Postman to simulate requests to the API. It will act as the client. The request's payload or body will be the order we wish to create. The request here is very simple, containing just a few elements necessary to create an order. It includes the Sage customer, a reference, and some basic item info. In the subsequent video, we will show how the Sage customer can be contextualized from the authenticated user. As a note, IMan is 100% configurable, so the request could have additional data or properties. Any requests are not constrained to a predefined data form. Using Postman, let's send a request. After a short moment, the request will return. But as you can see, we're receiving a 404 not found error from the Web API. This is because there is currently no endpoint configured. To configure the endpoint, let's go to IMan, then to Setup and Web API endpoints. After setting a unique ID for the endpoint and a description, the key fields are the HTTP method, which we will set to POST. The route, which will be set to Sage orders being the last part of the URL, and finally, for the initial part of the configuration, will allow anonymous requests. Returning back to Postman, if we send a request, the response is a 500 error instead of a 404, indicating the endpoint has no configuration associated. This indicates the endpoint is defined, but there is no job in IMan processing the request. The next step is to return to IMan to create the configuration. Let's create a new integration and then move to the Transform Setup tab. To bind the endpoint with the integration, we use the Web API endpoint reader and then double-click to open. The Web API endpoints list each of the unbound endpoints. If we select the endpoint we just created and press refresh. To make the request, return to Postman. In order to route the request to the designer, we need to add a header with the name of debug and the value set to true. The Web API will recognize the header and route the request to the designer so that it can be viewed in preview. Returning back to IMan, after a few moments, you can see each property of the request. For example, the route, the method, and the key thing here is the content field. The next step will use the JSON Reader to parse the request into its individual fields. Let's close the Web API endpoint reader and add the JSON Reader. Double-click to open. In order to read the body from the HTTP content field, we need to set the data source to transaction. then set the field to HTTP content. So once we've done that, we then move over to the Field Mapping tab, and then we map out the JSON Reader to parse the data from the request. Now, if I just return back to Postman and I return to the body, we can see that the data is positioned at the outermost object. We have two properties here, the order number and the customer number, and then we have the lines in the line items array. So we return to the JSON Reader. Type / and press edit. We're going to add in two new fields. First one is the customer, and that has a name or a value in the JSON called customer. We have order number. We save, press refresh. We can see on the right-hand side, we parsed out those two fields on the header. Next, we create line items transaction where we will parse out the detail fields. Press edit. The line item is contained within the line items array, and next we add in the fields that we wish to read. Add SKU. Now quantity. Description. And finally, line ID. Press save. Now we add fields for each items in the line items array. Then refresh. You can now see the line items. We've got the SKU, the quantity, the description, and the line ID, which we may use in the order integration. We are going to add a map transform where we will add a new empty field. This field will ultimately be mapped to the Sage order number field to catch the auto-generated value. This in turn will be used in the response back to the client. Press refresh and we can see the empty field. Now it's on to creating the order in Sage. Let's add a Sage 300 connector. Double-click to open. Now we select the type of data that we're wishing to import. We're going to be creating orders. We're just going to be inserting new orders. We go to Field Mapping. We map the header record onto the Sage header record. We're just going to be mapping the minimal fields, which is the customer number, order number, which will be the order reference. And finally, the Sage order number, which is being mapped to the Sage 300 order number field. Press the green tick to save. Press the edit button and map the SKU, quantity, and description to the relevant fields. Press refresh to generate the order. In a short moment, the integration completes, and we can see the order number field is populated. Let's go to Sage and review the order. Enter the order number, and there we are. And if we plug this into the order number field, you can see here is our order. Here are our 3 lines with the relevant quantity and the updated description. So we've created the order. Now we want to be able to send a response back to the client, which has got at least the Sage order number that was created for reference. So we close this off, and next we go to the JSON Writer. So to be able to route the output of the JSON Writer, we select WebAPI as our target. There's nothing to configure in the WebAPI. All that's going to happen here is to say the output of the WebAPI is going to be routed back to the response of the client. Then next, we set up the fields to export. Perhaps we want to send back the customer field at the customer property. The reference as your order reference. Now we could also send back the detail fields, but here let's just keep it simple and send back a minimal response containing the customer number and the 2 reference fields. Now I can press refresh, and this will queue up the response to the WebAPI module so that the client will receive the response. Since we canceled the previous request, we're unable to immediately see the response. Now, I can just press send, and because there's a response queued up, we can actually see that response coming back through here. Now, I can make changes to this. Say, for example, I don't want to send the customer number back, and perhaps I want to change the ordering of the field, so I unselect export. Perhaps I want to have the customer's order reference coming through with the second property. I can hit refresh, and you can see that's immediately reflected in the response. So this is all there is to constructing the integration. I'm now going to run the request in full. Presently, we're routing the request through the designer. To run the request in full, through the integration logic, all we need to do is to deselect the debug header. If we now press send, the request will be executed in total and we will receive a fresh order, which should end with 246. So that's come back, and it's come back with the order ending with 246. We can generate another by pressing send again. This will create yet another order, and so on. You may want to implement some sort of duplicate check within the integration logic to prevent duplicate orders from being accepted. But here in this simple demonstration, we're accepting any requests to create an order as long as the items are valid. So this concludes the first video in this series, where we've created an API endpoint to accept orders, to create the order in Sage 300, and to send back response. In the subsequent video, we're going to be enabling security on the API endpoint, which in turn will allow us to contextualize the customer number, so that the customer number did not need to be sent with the request. Thank you for your time, and hopefully we see you in the next video.